Hi, welcome to a brand new series of Innovation in Assessment. This is a joint live stream mini series from NCFE and FE News. My name is Gavin O'Mara. I'm the CEO and founder of FE News, and I'm joined with my host, Rebecca Conway.
I'm Rebecca Conway, Director of Research Innovation at NCFE. So really excited about this series that we have together. And today the focus is on inclusion.
Yeah, it's a three-part mini-series, basically. So we've got inclusion this week. Next week's going to be data, and the final week is going to be around personalisation. And today we've got like two epic guests that are going to be joining us in a bit. We've got Professor Mary Richardson from UCL. We've got Youssef Ibrahim from Cardiff and Vale College. But this is a really interesting period at the moment that we're in, Rebecca. Innovation in assessment, it's really big on the heart of NCFE. Could we talk about a little bit more around innovation assessment, particularly the Assessment Innovation Fund, which I know has been going for a while now? This is Windows 7, isn't it?
It is. We've been going for 4 years now, so since 2021. So innovation in assessment is a really big focus for NCFE. So we know that we'll talk a little bit more about the curriculum and assessment review soon, but in the UK education system, we're really dominated by high stakes written exams. And we're really interested at NCFE in pushing that conversation on, and thinking about where we can innovate and where we can use different approaches to assessment and different types of technology to really support learners and teachers in assessing a bit more effectively and in a way that's really engaging, actually. So we set up the Assessment Innovation Fund in 2021. As you say, Gavin, we've had this is our seventh funding window. It just opened on the 17th of February, and it's open until the 24th of March. I think the ticker along the bottom is going to give all that key information.
Oh, here we go.
There we go. But we've had now 3,000, in fact, over 3,000 learners and about 200 educators who benefited from pilots that NCFE have funded through this Assessment Innovation Fund. So what we want to do is give people the tools to really trial out these new technologies and see what works so that we can build up a really good evidence base.
Yeah, no, and I think that the whole sort of emphasis of this season and splitting those into those three topic areas really shows how, innovation and assessment really does make impactful change to learners, but also to give people the freedom to go and be innovative, do you know what I mean, and stuff like that. We've had the curriculum assessment review. What are some of those challenges and opportunities and thinking about innovation that you saw within that, Rebecca? Because I know that NCFE was quite heavily involved with that.
Yeah, so in our response, I've already talked a little bit, haven't I, about the focus on high stakes written exams. In our response, we really focused on this desire to move from those really sort of transactional approaches to assessment to truly transformational ones. So thinking about how we can harness data more effectively, we can use really effective formative assessment, and we can empower teachers and learners to understand a bit more about their learning with assessment, and just be a bit more integrated in teaching, learning and assessment rather than exams being, the thing at the end. We're really mindful of the digital divide and the fact that, some learners don't have access to computer equipment and digital technologies, but we're also open and excited by the potential of digital. We think that is a really effective way to give us a bit more assessment information to help inform planning for teachers, to give learners a bit more information about where they're going. So for us, they're really key parts of our curriculum and assessment review response, and we're really eagerly awaiting the feedback from Becky Francis and the group, actually, to see what's coming out of it.
Yeah, no, that sounds like really cool, and it's sort of, we're in this interesting time, aren't we, if you know what I mean, of where we can sort of take things forward. And like you're saying, this is around everything to do with inclusion, but I think it's next week's data next week is all around personalisation, and this is everything that we're sort of seeing and understanding with innovation in assessment. We're live, so if anyone's got any questions, please do feel to pop those over. If we can't answer, we will do our very best to be able to bring someone in who can. I think that could be a really good Yeah, we've got like literally two amazing experts.
We have.
So we've got Professor Mary Richardson from UCL and Youssef from who's just been vice principal. This announced literally the other day at Cardiff and Vale College. So I wonder if I could bring you both into the studio. So Mary, I'll just bring you in. Hey, Mary.
Hello.
Hey, Youssef, how are you?
Hi, good, thank you. Good.
So I don't know, like Rebecca, did you want to kick off?
I'll kick off. Yeah. So, Youssef, I think it'd be great to have that practitioner view first up, actually. So, from your experience in FE, where do you see the issues are with assessment inclusion and accessibility?
Yeah, thank you very much. And Gavin, I've never been called an epic guest before, so that's new. So thank you very much. I'll take that.
Youssef, always.
Yeah, no, thank you very much indeed. So, I guess as a practitioner and as looking at how assessment lands in the sector, generally in education, I always think of, unfortunately, I always think about COVID and what that did in terms of our mindset, our ideology around assessment, what was acceptable, how flexible we became to essentially show that people had passed their qualifications, and we did that in a very reactive way. And there's a lot of stuff in that time that I think, it's an interesting case study anyway, just looking at what we did in terms of our design for assessment during that time. And I bring that up because we responded based on need and demand to a crisis, but we were quick to respond, had to come up with very innovative solutions. They weren't always purposefully fit for the task ahead, but ultimately it asked teachers, when you're looking at the school sector and in the colleges sector, to make the best judgment they could with the information they had available based on the opportunity that they had given the learners in the reasonable context that we're in. So why don't we do that now anyway? Is my question, right? But rather than doing that reactively, let's do that proactively, to know that learners are in the context that they're in. They have the challenges that they have, and those challenges will be different upon each learner depending where they are and depending what needs they have. And ultimately, our assessment should be a measurement of how much progress they've made based on their starting point. But at the same time, it needs to also give an indication of their ability and competency, so employers know what they're taking on, or universities know what they're taking on, or colleges know what they're taking on, or apprentices know, apprenticeship providers know what they're taking on, training providers. So the issue is, if one size doesn't fit all, and we fit in and we've very much evolved from we've moved from a factory model of education, an industrial model of education. It actually has its origins from the church pews. So you had the pews, you had the priest talking to rows. We've moved so much from there, haven't we? There's someone standing at the front talking to rows. That how do we move away from there and then actually have something that is inputted by the learner, but then all of a sudden you've got a very chaotic factory. And this is the challenge that we're currently facing, is what is the alternative, and is there a way forward that is more responsive to the learner, that can meet their needs in a reasonable way, that is still of value to employers. So I think that's ultimately the challenge that we have. But I think it's a challenge that we can absolutely achieve if we work together, and ultimately work with learners as well.
Definitely. And I think one of the things that come out of COVID was the whole thing around accessibility, digital inclusion as well, wasn't it? And by design, there was the whole thinking flipped, didn't it, around like the whole sort of thing around the design. I want to come to that in a little bit, but yeah, really, really good points, you said. Mary, can I sort of bring it over to you? Really love what you're writing is all seems to be focused around trust, which is kind of key when you're thinking of qualifications and assessment, and also fairness, which is also very, very key. Is our system in the UK, would you say from your perspective, is it fair? Is it fair to learners, or how could things be improved, particularly with technology and innovation in mind?
Okay. I'm going to come out with a great academic response, which is, first of all, it depends what you mean by assessment, and then it depends what you mean by fairness as well. But I'll start with the first one. I think one of the things that I write a lot about is how we understand what assessment is. Mostly when we talk about it in public sort of arenas, we're talking actually about high stakes testing. We're talking about a very specific corner of assessment. And there's nothing wrong with that. That's an important part of our system. And it's an important way that we can understand, what learners have learned. We can use it with employers, we can use it with universities and things like that. But it is only one form of assessment, but it's the one that we get really preoccupied with. And I think it's really difficult from a technical assessment point of view. And I come from an exam board sort of technical background. What we do generally in terms of high stakes testing is about as fair as we can make it at the moment, given what we're trying to do with thousands and thousands of students and literally millions of examinations and scripts and everything else every year. Where the things that we can't do in relation to unfairness are some of the things that Yusuf was talking about. And I mean, we do keep looking at COVID. Yesterday, we just published from UCL the second Trends in Maths and Science report, where we looked in detail at how young people feel about learning and how they're achieving in maths and science at both primary and secondary levels. And there's a real issue there. And one of the biggest issues is the gender gap has opened up again. So what's happening there? We don't know. That's the next phase. We're going to actually start to try and do some research into why that's happened, that boys are outstripping girls again, and that we thought that gap had closed or was certainly closing. The other big element in that is confidence. What we found from the results that we published there was that boys were much more likely to be very confident about how they were doing it, and girls were much more likely not to be confident, which is the really important bit. So again, what's happening there in terms of learner confidence, and I think some of that is to do with, we think, potentially fallout from COVID. It comes down to the basis, and I've been talking about this for 20 years, also in terms of, if you want fair assessment, you have to make fair education systems, and you have to make a generally fairer access to good resources. Students who do better are generally wealthier, they have better resources, their parents are educated. There are really important factors in that. And so if you come from a background where you don't have those advantages, you are substantially disadvantaged, even in school, no matter how great the school is, no matter how great the teachers are. There's always that chip there of disadvantage that is hard to shake off. And I think that's something that's really important that we look at. And I think the other point is, I'm very excited about new technologies and the affordances they can bring, and the way that they can help and support students. And there's some brilliant research going on in this area. One person to look for, I would say to your viewers, is Irene Custodio at Pearson, who's doing amazing work in looking at how tech is used in high stakes assessment. But what we have in our schools is an under-resourcing. So one of the problems, and again, we found this when we surveyed the teachers in TIMS, is they can't rely on their connections all the time. They don't have the resourcing. And again, it's all very well to say, yeah, this is great. But if you don't know if your internet access is stable, if you don't know that you've got a working computer, then that's so difficult as a teacher to be able to go into a classroom and not have that sustainability. And I think that's really important. And post-COVID, we have got a huge national public confidence issue with our high stakes testing. It's not surprising, really, based on what happens, particularly in the summer of 2020. So I think moving forward, this is it's a public issue. I keep arguing for this. It's not a simple solution. It needs better public understanding and better literacy about what assessment is and what it's for, what its purpose is.
Yeah, definitely. Rebecca, I know you got a question. The name is just from the audience. Is this put a question in, which is actually really leads on from both what Yusuf and Mary said. Can I throw that in?
Yeah, throw it in, Gavin. Yeah.
So it's around name. Thank you for this, and I think it's around sort of looking at inclusive learning, particularly with students who experience learning gaps. So this is very much what happened around COVID, and also inclusivity around that as well. I mean, anyone want to answer? I mean, Rebecca, even, you know, it's just whoever wants to sort of jump in on that, really. I'll throw it up again. Go on, Yusuf. I'll
yeah. Okay. Yeah. No problem at all. So I think gaps in knowledge is again context of where that learner is. And I think, you know, the things that Mary has brought up is absolutely spot on in terms of what are we even talking about when we talk about assessment, and we are a victim of our own success in terms of the educational model that we have, on the basis that it's a global model, and that there aren't many global models of education, and it's a relatively good educational model as well. As we are seeing, though, it doesn't necessarily serve the needs of people, of enough people, from the different contexts that they're in. But there are definitely improvements to be made. And when you look at other assessment models from across the world, for example, the Finland formative assessment practices, or Singapore's holistic assessment practices as well, you've got other ways of assessing where, as Mary was talking about this corner, that there are other aspects of assessment that come in. And so to go back to the question about the gaps, I think the question becomes, what are we saying is a validated form of assessment that counts towards a qualification that we can agree upon, that carries parity of esteem and weight, so it can be portable across all the places that it needs to go into. And that comes back to the point around gaps, because gaps is having knowledge gaps is a normal thing in human development. And the other thing that I would throw in here as well, and we're getting much more precise on this now as well, is the biological developments of our brain and the neurology behind our learning show. And if you map that against our educational model, there are great disparities in terms of what we're able to learn, when we're able to learn it, and also how potentially we should be assessed on things as well. So I do think that what Mary is talking about, having a national conversation to look at and bring in the latest evidence in terms of what's happening, and then how technology can take a part in that. If it's working, then that becomes really important. And so to hit the button on the part of that question, I think that we need to set up assessments that take into account that people will have gaps and will have gaps in different areas.
Yeah, thanks, Yusuf. And I think just to add to that as well, I fully support everything you're saying. And I think it's about building assessment literacy, isn't it? And I think this speaks to what you talk about in your last book, Mary, about public confidence and trust and assessment literacy. And empowering people to understand how assessment works more effectively. I think we did a really interesting trial with an organisation called Pupil Progress, which is like a sort of data tracking tool. So empowering teachers to really understand at a granular level where learners were, and more clearly sort of denoting where those gaps were. And I think the assessment literacy that comes with using tools like that is really beneficial to everyone. I think if we can have a broader remit for what the kind of end bit of assessment is, the kind of more high stakes assessment, and include more teacher assessment, it would be really beneficial, I think, in being a bit more inclusive and helping us to sort of fill those knowledge gaps.
Yeah, 100%. I've got another question, but I know you've got one for Mary, Rebecca. I'll just hold off on that for a moment and then. Yeah,
well, I would actually just like to think about, so we're talking about that end bit of assessment with a kind of high stakes summative assessment. And I just thought it'd be really interesting to ask Mary about alternative approaches to assessment that might be a bit fairer, and alternative approaches to marking as well. So things like comparative judgment. Where do you think the opportunities are for those?
I'm not sure there are any great opportunities for them at the moment. One of the things I found most disappointing post-COVID was I feel we missed a trick, actually, that we had that point in time where we could have made substantive change. And I think it's basically we've kind of gone back. People have talked a lot about going back to normal. Well, our normal now isn't what our normal was in 2019, 2020. We're in a different place. So it's a shame in a way that we missed that. I mean, I still feel that there's something to be learned from suddenly we wanted to trust teachers all of a sudden, and for a short while during COVID, of like, oh my goodness, no, we want their judgment as well, not just the the algorithm, etc., and using a statistical approach to awarding and giving outcomes. And I think there is that opportunity there. I think again it just comes back really to what Yusuf was saying, though, that we need the opportunity to show people the value of assessments that aren't just graded, or assessments that don't just result in a number or a grade or whatever the outcome of it. The vastness of the system that we're in is just, it's overwhelming. And I think it's really important to help people, particularly if you really, really want to be inclusive. It's about helping learners to understand how you're going to use assessment to help them understand where they are, where they need to go, what's happening, what does progress look like for you, what does progress look like for you in that subject. And the problem we have there is that those things require a lot of resourcing. They require education of the teachers in a particular way to help them do their job. They require a lot of time to be able to do that. The great thing about examinations is that they're relatively, I mean, they're not cheap in one sense because we spend millions of pounds on them, but they are cheap because you're getting everyone in a room doing something quite quickly. And you can do things in that way, which is a cheaper and easier way to assess. But it doesn't tell you everything. It's only giving you this snapshot in time. But we have the knowledge. I mean, we have the research in assessment. I've been in assessment research over 25 years, and the change in the time I've been in it is just astonishing what we know. I do have quite a bit of time for things like comparative judgment, again, in their context, in terms of actually thinking about a different way of looking at marking. But again, I would say that comes down to, again, helping people understand what that means. And again, educating enough people to be judges in comparative judgment. That requires education. It requires investment. And I think all those things are a challenge for us at the moment. They're certainly a challenge for the new government in terms of what is it going to spend its money on. All of this stuff it's not. And I think the other really important thing that I always say to people imagine that, if you want to make a change, you could persuade someone to make that change and then just do it. You might not see any impact for a decade, and you have to live with that. That's the human condition. That's how we work. People often ask me, oh, what's the terrible fallout from COVID? And I just keep going, I don't know. Probably we'll know in about 5-10 years, maybe, really, what's happened. Because we can't. That's not how the world works. So, yeah.
That's an excellent point, actually, because, we look at countries like Wales, where they've introduced quite radically different approaches to assessment, and we're not yet seeing that output of, from those primary school tests that the Welsh government run.
Yeah.
So is it worth going? It probably is to keep the knowledge developing. But yeah, we absolutely don't see those immediate outputs, do we?
Can I just add one more thing there? The other thing I think is really important to bring into this conversation is that we don't move too quickly in response to fears about AI and cheating and all of the moral panic that surrounds that at the moment as well. I find it really interesting that actually the way we view the behaviour of our young people is immediately a deficit model, is that they're going to cheat with that. And I find that deeply insulting and frustrating for a start, because most people don't cheat. The stats don't show that. Actually, what concerns me more is about that we will go back to having kind of examinations and very restricted forms of assessment that don't help people who have particular learning needs or need particular support in their assessment. So I think that's an important thing for people to bear in mind.
Absolutely. I don't think we want to jump too quickly in response to AI. I know we've done a little bit of research. We commissioned Open University to look at how learners are engaging with assessments using AI. And actually, I think the onus is on us to make sure we're making assessments that reflect the skills that learners will need going forward.
Yeah.
So I'm stealing your question time, Gavin, aren't I?
No. We're nearly going out of time. I've got, Yusuf, I've got a really interesting question for you from Shura around being learner-centered and prioritise equity and genuine learning over high stakes. But I wanted to ask you as well to layer on that. If we talk about innovation and development, we talk about user experience, and it's like that whole sort of element around the assessment experience. How can we be looking at design here around sort of how we can make sure that we're not being reactive, but being very purposeful around being inclusive, around how we can be looking moving forward?
Yeah, I think it's building on what's been said around the time lag, and we're in a rush to know things and to get an answer straight away, right, and which is why we have the testing model that we do, because we want to know that someone is either competent at maths or English or they're not, and the world doesn't work like that. And so it really goes back to, for me, a fundamental question of what does it mean to be educated, and how can we tell? And then if we can tell, what impact then does that have on society in terms of what that person can do in society, both civically but also for their own benefit? So we talk about, so the words I use, we talk about, but we pay lip service to, which is equity by design. But we don't have equity by design, because if we look at the mass testing model, I then need to apply for an exam access arrangement. So I need to do something different to try and make myself fit into the system that is there. That is not an equitable arrangement by any stretch of the imagination. The second thing I'd say as well is when we're looking now at more emerging categorizations, these needs have always been there, but I call them emerging categorizations. So neurodiversity is a relatively new term. People have always been neurodiverse, but we're now paying more attention to neurodiversity because there's a label attached to it. The stress that I see from learners and teachers when it comes to assessments is good to get people in stressful situations. The body needs that, but then there's a balanced approach to this, and I think that there is a disproportionate amount of emphasis and stress and time and resource spent on endpoint assessment models. And so I think that what we need to look at is, what does it mean to have a truly equitable assessment model that fairly assesses the contextual surroundings of that learner, and uses awarding bodies, and the colleagues at NCFE do a fantastic job at this in terms of trying to get to think about the context of learners and institutions, and what would you build from that, and then as a result of that, having trust, but taking Mary's point on here about how you build trust, having trust that these localities are able to, within their own selves, able to assess and learn and qualify that these people have achieved a standard. And I think that would really help from a local level of saying to localities, get to know your communities, get to know your people very well, design your assessments accordingly to show that they have been educated, and then that can be a verification that we can take on the national picture.
Yeah, no, really cool. We're nearly out of time. Everyone's now flying in with loads of questions. There's Roger, we will try to bring this in. We've got personalisation episode 3, so we try to bring that in for you. Anthea made a really good point around AI-driven education and being very mindful around how we're sort of using artificial intelligence. That's a really, really good point. But we're right out of time. Everyone's flying in questions now. But Rebecca, I don't know if you wanted to help us with wrap up and maybe to think around some questions you want to put to Yusuf and Mary. We've literally got a couple of minutes left, everyone. I'm sorry, time flew.
Yeah, no, I think we always like to wrap these shows up, don't we? We're just reflecting on one policy change or one sort of development, I think, that you would really like to see to drive things forward in terms of inclusive assessment. So if we sort of share that around the virtual room. Yusuf, do you want to go first?
I'll be short and sharp to hand over to Mary. So I think it's the point that I just made around equitable assessment. If there was a policy that had equitable assessment design at its heart, then I think that would do a lot of good for the assessment world.
And over to you, Mary.
Yeah, and mine would be to take the pressure out of the system, to reject this linear system of assessment that we've gone back to. It's a retrograde step. It puts a huge amount of pressure on teachers, on students, parents, etc. And it's not always about learning. It's often about accountability for schools. So I think it's really important that we think about that, because that's about the human being as part of the education system too.
Absolutely, thank you. And my wish would be flexibility, actually. So I think the work you talked about that Irene from Pearson is doing, really interesting in terms of using technology to create that completely personalized learning experience. But as Gavin said, we've got personalized learning in week 3 of these webinars, so I won't go on about that. I need to hand over to you, Gavin, don't I? Because we need to wrap up.
We've gone over a bit, but it's been a really, really good show today. Like Yusuf, Mary, thank you so much. Rebecca, it's always a pleasure. But and the audience, thank you. Sorry we couldn't answer those final 2, but we'll try to weave those in later on in the series. We've got data next week with 3 guests. Someone joining from on their travels as well from India as well. Hopefully the connection works okay. And we've got a really good show looking around that. And Rebecca, I know you want to do a plug for next week.
I do. It's the week of VocTech next week. So UFI VocTech Trust are doing their week of VocTech, 17th to the 21st of March. Loads of events. I'm really excited to go down to London and go to a couple of those. So weekofvoctech.co.uk. Do have a look. Yeah,
no, definitely. And for everyone that's joined us, I know there's been a few, is been around thinking of how we can use the Assessment Innovation Fund to be able to make impactful change, to be able to help inclusion, help personalisation, to be able to using data well. Crack onto the URL here. It'll be on the legacy article as well. So I want to say thank you to everyone. We will see you next week. And thanks for joining us today. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks a lot.